I didn't flinch when her palm cracked across my face. The sting was sharp, but the stares from 30 strangers cut deeper. My uniform, my backpack. Suddenly, they were proof I didn't belong here. I could have shouted, demanded respect. Instead, I counted my breaths, kept my voice level, and let her believe she'd won. 5 minutes later, the captain's voice would change everything. By the time we touched down, the woman who struck me wouldn't just lose her job. She'd face something far worse, the truth, in front of everyone. I boarded business class with the stiffness of a sleepless vigil still lodged behind my eyes, the black ribbon from my mother's funeral tucked beneath the collar of my uniform. 48 hours is too little time for grief to cool. It rode with me up the jet bridge, sat in my throat while I kept my cap squared, and weighed down the camouflage backpack that had followed me through dust storms and fluorescent terminals alike. The cabin lights were bright enough to make everything honest. Fingerprints on the galley door, mascara on a headset, a scuff on the bulkhead where bags had bumped. I moved like I had practiced 1,000 times. Check the ticket, breathe through the courtesy smile. Find 2A, stay small, stay steady. Because the world does not always know what to do with a woman in uniform when she is not at war. Lindsay stood at the doorway with a professional mask that fit until it didn't. The instant her eyes ticked from my shoulder patches to the embossed business on the boarding pass, the mask cracked. Politeness drained from her face the way coffee drains through a filter, steady and inevitable. She didn't ask where I was seated. She told me to wait. A palm lifted toward my backpack like a stop sign. Her voice carried that sweet metallic edge people save for warnings disguised as help. Policies, space, safety. All those words that mean no when they are spoken to certain bodies. I have learned to inventory a room in a single breath. 2 men in suits pretending not to watch. A grandmother tracing the seam of her seat armrest with a thumbnail, scolding the air under her breath. A young mother wrestling a stroller gate tag like a knot. And Paige, brown hair pulled tight, name badge tilted. A flicker of recognition that crossed her face and vanished before it could settle. I lifted my backpack toward the overhead. Lindsay shifted, almost graceful, denying me the space with half a step and a full smile that never reached her eyes. "There's limited space up here," she said, not looking at me so much as beyond me, to a place where I theoretically did not exist. "We'll need to check that bag." I told her it contained military equipment cleared for carry-on under policy, kept my voice level, offered to show the documentation. She asked for my ticket again, turned it in the light as if the paper might confess. The man across the aisle slid 2 rigid carry-ons into the empty bin without a word from her. He smelled like expensive soap and certainty. I thought of my mother's hands folding incense smoke over a photograph. It is a skill to stand still without becoming small. I practiced it while she summoned the cabin supervisor and then decided she didn't need him. She pivoted, told me to place the backpack at my feet and not touch the overhead again. The cabin lights hummed. The aircraft inhaled. My jaw unclenched and reclenched without asking permission. Paige's eyes grazed mine on her way past with a stack of coats. There was warning there, and something like apology. The slap did not come from nowhere. I saw the shoulder set, the elbow draw a short arc, the open hand shaped like certainty. I had time to think one thought, do not give them a scene, before heat splashed my cheek and the cabin inhaled again, this time through 30 open mouths. Sound falls strange inside an airplane. It has to borrow the walls to find itself. The slap found every surface and came back larger. My head tilted because the body follows physics. My eyes stayed on hers because dignity follows choice. I did not raise my voice. The sting was bright, and then it wasn't. I tasted the metallic ghost of grief at the back of my tongue and remembered my mother telling me to keep my back straight when people tried to buckle it. Lindsay's anger looked practiced, a script delivered so often it had become muscle memory. She gestured toward the galley, toward nowhere, toward the idea that I should disappear. My backpack still hung from my shoulder, a familiar weight balancing the day. Somewhere behind me, a bottle cap clicked. the small punctuation of someone beginning to film. The businessman across the aisle sat up straighter, his certainty briefly dented. The grandmother whispered, "Oh dear," in a voice made for casseroles and condolences. The young mother rocked her child and stared at Lindsay with the look people reserve for fires they didn't start. Paige set the coats down on an empty seat and stood very still, as if stillness might let events pass through her without sticking. I took one breath for the person I used to be, the cadet who thought rules were walls that kept out weather. I took another for the woman I had become, the officer who knows rules are instruments, and instruments must be tuned. What I wanted was simple: a seat, a place for my backpack, a quiet hour to grieve between airports. What I needed was simpler: to remember that a scene is not a strategy. I kept my hands visible and my words rationed like water. Lindsay asked again to see my ticket, a third time now, and I gave it to her because non-compliance is the costume prejudice wants you to wear. She held the paper like evidence and read my name as if it contained a challenge. The overhead bin above 2A was still open, still empty enough to cradle my backpack with room to spare. Instead, she pointed to the floor. The floor is for feet. The overhead is for stories we tell ourselves about who deserves height. Paige moved closer, not quite intervening, not quite retreating. In another life, in another terminal, we had passed each other in a corridor with a whistleblower box between us and a poster about dignity taped too high to read. Recognition is a fragile thing. It can save you or ruin you depending on who sees it. Her eyes said, "I know." Her mouth said nothing. My cheek throbbed the way a bell does after it has been struck, loudest in the moment when the ringer stops. I slid into 2A, backpack on my lap, because sometimes retreat is the only clean line toward victory. The captain's door remained closed, but air moved differently now, like the aircraft had started listening. I fixed my gaze on the seat back ahead, counted rivets, and let the room believe I was finished. I wasn't. The cabin noise thinned into a kind of hum that let my mind wander without permission. My cheek still held the warmth of Lindsay's hand, but it was the older scars that ached louder. There are wounds the skin forgets and the spirit refuses to. I remembered the gas station outside Fayetteville where I had stopped for coffee on my way back from drill. My fatigues had been clean, my boots shined, and yet the cashier asked for 3 forms of ID while the man ahead of me, flip-flops, beer on his breath, paid with a check and no questions. I remembered the hotel clerk in Dallas who insisted I must be with the wedding party, because surely a woman in uniform couldn't afford a suite. I remembered standing at the baggage carousel while a security officer followed me for 10 minutes, radio crackling, eyes never leaving my backpack. Each memory layered over the next, thin sheets of paper that, when stacked, could stop a blade. The lights above flickered as the aircraft settled into its cruising altitude. I adjusted the backpack on my lap, feeling the rigid corner of the document pouch press against my thigh. Across the aisle, Ava Reynolds raised her phone slightly higher. She didn't hide it. The lens caught the cabin lights and winked at Lindsay, who scowled but didn't approach. Ava's face was calm in that way lawyers learn, open enough to seem harmless, closed enough to protect the verdict. "I'm documenting everything," she murmured, voice low enough for only me to hear. "Patterns matter in court." I gave her a small nod. Speaking would have cost more than I was willing to spend just yet. Lindsay moved down the aisle with a tray of drinks, pausing at each row except mine. When she reached the businessman 2 seats ahead, her tone shifted into something warmer, more familiar. He leaned back in his seat, glanced over his shoulder at me, and chuckled under his breath. "Hard to keep the pretenders out of business class," he said to her, just loud enough for the row to hear. "Half the time, those uniforms are from surplus stores." The words slid into my ear like cold steel. Ava's eyebrows arched, her thumb stilling on the screen as she caught the audio. Lindsay didn't correct him. She didn't need to. Silence can be consent when it's worn like perfume. I looked at him fully now. Gray suit, tie with tiny anchors, the kind of tan you can only get from golf courses. His cufflinks caught the light as he sipped something amber from a short glass. He didn't break eye contact. "You think she's listening?" he asked Lindsay with a smirk. "She hears what she wants to hear," Lindsay replied, already turning toward the galley. The part of me trained to de-escalate wanted to let it drop. The part of me trained to survive knew better. I held the man's gaze a heartbeat longer, then turned back to the window. Below, clouds stretched in endless white, indifferent to rank or rumor. The intercom crackled with the captain's voice, smooth as a news anchor's. He spoke about tailwinds, arrival times, the weather in D.C. His words skimmed the surface of the moment like stones on a lake, never breaking through. But as the cabin relaxed, Ava leaned slightly closer. "They're trying to bait you," she whispered. "Make you the problem so they can write you up." I exhaled slowly through my nose. "Then I won't give them what they want." Her smile was brief, almost conspiratorial. "Good, but I will give them what they deserve." She tapped the screen twice, saving the last clip, then opened a new file. Paige passed by again with a stack of service items, her route curving just enough to brush against my arm. "Stay steady," she said so softly I wasn't sure if I heard it or imagined it. The expression in her eyes was harder to read this time, less pity, more warning. I wondered what she knew and who she thought might be listening. From the galley, the businessman's voice rose again, animated now in conversation with Lindsay. "I've flown with her type before," he said. "Always some story about a mission, always a reason they can't check a bag. Next thing you know, they're asking for free drinks and upgrades." A ripple of polite laughter came from someone I couldn't see. My hands tightened around the backpack straps, leather creaking softly. I counted backwards from 10. The air felt thinner, though we were flying smooth. Ava's phone caught another angle, this time with Paige in the frame, glancing toward me before disappearing into the forward galley. My pulse slowed to a deliberate march. I'd been here before, on firing ranges, in negotiation rooms, in the quiet before a breach. Moments where action felt inevitable but not yet chosen. The businessman swiveled halfway in his seat, speaking to no one in particular. "Bet she can't even name her commanding officer." He chuckled again, but the sound was brittle now, testing the edge of something. I let the comment hang. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can give an opponent is the silence in which to hear himself. The seatbelt sign chimed on, though there was no turbulence. Lindsay's voice came over the PA, reminding everyone to remain seated. I recognized the maneuver, not about safety, but control. Keep the subject contained, limit their movement, reduce the chance of contact with allies. Ava slipped her phone into her blazer pocket, but her eyes stayed sharp. "They're playing a long game," she said. "You just have to outlast them." I thought about the funeral 2 days ago, about the folded flag and the sound of taps dissolving into winter air. My mother had outlasted more than most. Ration lines, base transfers, deployments that kept her children's birthdays marked in red on a wall calendar. She had done it without applause and without asking permission. The businessman finally faced forward again, muttering something into his drink. Lindsay emerged from the galley, expression smoothed back into service neutrality. But the undercurrent was there, the way it always is when someone thinks they have the upper hand. Paige appeared behind her, and for a moment, our eyes met across the aisle. There was a decision in hers, like a coin spinning in the air, not yet landed. She shifted her gaze to the businessman, then back to me, before moving on. The hum of the engines filled the space between words. I adjusted my posture, set the backpack more firmly against my legs, and let the weight remind me, patience is a weapon too. The scars don't fade, but sometimes they harden into armor. And armor, when the time is right, can be turned into something far sharper. The first drink service began like a slow tide moving up the aisle, trays clinking, ice shifting in silver tongs. Lindsay handled each row with the polished rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Smiles for some, polite efficiency for others. When she reached my row, the current broke. She moved past without pause, pivoted toward the passenger across from me, and asked about his preference for bourbon or scotch. I could smell the citrus twist she dropped into his glass, bright and sharp, before the cart rolled on. It wasn't just a mission, it was theater. She lingered at certain seats to talk about the weather in D.C., complimented a woman's scarf, laughed at a joke about airline food from 2 decades ago. When her gaze brushed mine, it was in the way you glance at a stranger you've decided will never matter to your life. Ava didn't let it pass. She reached into her own seat pocket, produced a sealed bottle of water, and placed it on my tray table without ceremony. "Here," she said, her voice steady. "Hydration is important." I accepted it with a nod, twisting the cap slowly, letting the sound carry just enough to make Lindsay's head turn half an inch from the galley. The air between us felt charged, not with the snap of open conflict, but with the low, constant buzz of something building. "She's making it obvious," Ava murmured once Lindsay disappeared behind the service curtain. "Obvious can be useful," I replied, keeping my eyes on the condensation sliding down the bottle. The businessman from earlier, Mr. Surplus Store Theorist, shifted in his seat and leaned toward me as if offering an olive branch. "You know," he said, "you'd have a much easier time if you just blended in a little more. Lose the uniform unless you're on duty. People make assumptions." I met his gaze long enough to make him uncomfortable, then turned back to the window. Assumptions don't change when you dress them differently. They just get better at hiding. My phone, set to silent, buzzed once against my thigh. I pulled it from the pocket on my backpack strap, cupping the screen from view. The message was not from FAA Command or any of the coded contacts tied to my current clearance. The number was unfamiliar, the area code unregistered. "Let her continue. We need proof." The words were in Vietnamese, crisp and deliberate. "Let her continue. We need evidence." For a moment, the hum of the engines receded, replaced by the quiet click of possibilities lining up in my mind. I hadn't spoken Vietnamese since my last deployment with Allied liaison units 3 years ago. Only a handful of people in my professional circle knew I could still understand it. Whoever sent this had reached past my official channels, past the mission parameters I'd been briefed on before boarding. Ava noticed the way my fingers tightened on the phone. "Bad news?" she asked softly. "Just noise," I said, slipping it back into my pocket. But my pulse had shifted tempo. Lindsay reappeared with a basket of packaged snacks, setting them down with exaggerated care for each passenger, except me. When she reached Ava, she paused, eyes flicking to the water bottle on my tray. "Ma'am," she said to Ava, "if you have extra beverages, please keep them to yourself. We can't have people bypassing service protocols." Ava smiled in that precise, lawyerly way that says, "I'm listening, but you're already in trouble." "I'll make a note of that," she replied. Lindsay's lips pressed into a line as she moved on. I could feel the businessman's smirk without turning my head. He thrived on the performance, like a spectator at a match he thought he'd already picked the winner of. Another buzz from my phone. This time, "Camera 4 has her angle. Just hold." No sender ID, no traceable signature in the metadata when I glanced at the quick view properties. Whoever was behind this had resources. Camera 4 could mean anything. CCTV at the gate, security feeds from the jet bridge, even in-cabin surveillance that wasn't part of standard airline equipment. I took a slow breath, cataloging what I knew. Lindsay's behavior was escalating in pettiness, but still shy of outright violence, unless you counted the slap, which I very much did. The unseen texter wanted the escalation to continue, wanted her to dig deeper into whatever hole she didn't yet realize she was in. Ava slid a small notepad toward me, a fresh page folded over to conceal whatever she had written. "Play along?" it read in quick, slanted handwriting. I met her eyes and gave a fraction of a nod. She didn't need to know about the texts, not yet. But she understood the rhythm of a legal trap as well as I understood the cadence of an operation. Lindsay's voice floated back from 3 rows up, describing the dessert options to a family in matching sweatshirts. She laughed at something the youngest child said, the sound sweet enough to make Sugar jealous. When she came back down the aisle, she managed to bump my shoulder with the edge of the cart, muttering a perfunctory, "sorry," without slowing. The PA chimed for turbulence, though the ride was still smooth. I recognized the move again. Keep people seated. Keep control. The businessman glanced over, clearly enjoying the way the net was being tightened. Another text lit my phone. Final act coming. Stay seated. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the tension settle into my muscles the way I'd learned to before a parachute drop. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I could still see my mother's hands folding the funeral flag, her voice in my ear. Endure until the break, then move. When I opened them, Ava was watching me, her expression equal parts curiosity and concern. I took another sip from the bottle she'd given me, set it down carefully, and fixed my gaze on the galley curtain where Lindsay had vanished again. The game was still in motion, and for now, my move was to wait. The first jolt was subtle, just enough to make a few glasses tremble in their holders, but the second one pitched the cabin hard to the left. Conversations broke off mid-sentence. A suitcase thudded in an overhead bin. The chime sounded, and the captain's voice came over the PA, steady but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, take your seats." The air pressure shifted in that way you can feel in your teeth, and then the oxygen masks dropped with a mechanical clatter, swaying like pendulums above startled faces. I was already moving. The old man 2 rows ahead of me was fumbling with his mask, his hands shaking as the elastic tangled around his hearing aid. His seatmate was frozen, eyes wide, not sure how to help. Training overrides thought in moments like this. I slipped out of my belt, braced myself against the armrests, and reached him in 2 strides. "Sir, let me assist," I said, fitting the cup over his nose and mouth, tightening the strap until it sealed. His eyes met mine in gratitude even before he could speak. I gave him a small nod and turned back toward my own seat. That's when Lindsay's voice cut through the ambient panic, sharp enough to make people flinch. "Ma'am, return to your seat immediately." She was standing in the aisle, mask dangling uselessly around her neck, eyes fixed on me like I'd just committed a crime. "I was helping him with his mask," I said evenly, stepping back toward 2A. "You were interfering with safety procedures," she shot back, loud enough for 3 rows in each direction to hear. "Passengers are not authorized to assist others. That's the crew's responsibility." Several people glanced between us, confusion in their expressions. "He needed immediate help," I said. "I'm trained." "I don't care what you're trained for," she interrupted, her voice spiking. "On this aircraft, you follow my instructions, period." The turbulence eased as quickly as it had begun, the aircraft smoothing into level flight. The masks still dangled above us, ghostly and out of place now that the danger had passed. I buckled in, keeping my tone measured. "Your name, please. I'll need it for my report." That earned me a laugh. Not the kind that comes from humor, but the brittle, condescending kind people use when they want you to feel small. "Oh, you'll be filing a report? Well, by all means, make sure you spell it right." She tapped the plastic badge on her uniform as if it were a shield. I held her gaze, memorizing every detail. Her posture, the slight flush in her cheeks, the way her fingers curled against the service cart handle. From the galley curtain, Paige emerged, moving down the aisle as if to check on passengers. As she passed my row, her hand brushed the back of my seat, and she leaned in just enough for her voice to be mine alone. "They're testing you," she murmured. "Someone wants to see how you handle this." Before I could react, she was past me. Her expression returned to the neutral professionalism of any other crew member on duty. But the words lodged themselves under my skin. Testing me. It explained the text messages. It explained the way Lindsay's provocations had been building, each one calculated to pull me closer to the edge. It even explained the businessman's taunts. Less random malice, more like scripted antagonism. The question was, who had written the script? The captain's voice returned to the PA, thanking us for our cooperation, instructing us to leave the masks hanging until the crew could secure them. Lindsay walked the aisle with forced calm, collecting quick glances from passengers who had witnessed our exchange. When she passed me again, She leaned slightly toward my ear. "Careful, Major," she said softly, her tone mocking. "You're not in charge here." She kept walking before I could answer, but the fact that she knew my rank was its own revelation. I hadn't introduced myself to anyone on this flight as anything but Ms. Carter. My rank wasn't visible unless you knew exactly what to look for in the stitching on my service jacket. Someone had told her. I adjusted the backpack on my lap, feeling the weight of its contents and of the situation. The messages, Paige's warning, Lindsay's slip, they were all threads in a net tightening around me. The old man I'd helped earlier tapped my arm. "Don't let her rattle you," he whispered through his still loose mask. "I saw what you did. You probably saved me from passing out." I gave him a small smile. "Just doing what anyone should do." "Not everyone would," he said, his voice certain. The intercom chimed again. "Flight attendants, please prepare for service." The masks were gathered, stowed away, and the cabin returned to its strange approximation of normal. But the air between Lindsay and me was different now, charged with the knowledge that the line had been crossed twice over. Once when she accused me publicly, and again when she revealed what she knew she shouldn't. Paige came back down the aisle with a tray of fresh cups. When she reached my seat, she set one down without a word, but the faintest nod told me she hadn't spoken by accident earlier. She was giving me something, information, maybe even an alliance, but it came with no guarantees. I sipped the water, letting the cold steady me. The urge to act was strong, but the unseen hand directing this wanted me to jump too soon. So I settled back, eyes on the aisle, and waited for the next move. In operations, you learn to tell the difference between turbulence and an intentional shake. What had just happened was no accident, and the people behind it were still watching. The seatbelt sign had been off for less than a minute when I unbuckled and rose from 2A, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who doesn't want to attract attention, and failing. I could feel eyes on my back. Ava's steady, the businessman suspicious, Lindsay's sharp as a blade. I kept the backpack on my shoulder as I walked forward, brushing past the galley curtain into the narrow service space. Paige was there, refilling a coffee pot. She glanced up at me but didn't speak. The air smelled faintly of brewed beans and citrus from the drink garnishes. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a slim, matte black phone, unregistered, encrypted, and not part of the FAA-issued equipment. To anyone watching, it might look like I was calling my office. To anyone listening on the wrong channel, it might sound like static. But I pressed and held a sequence on the side panel until the secure line engaged. "Carter," came the voice on the other end. Low, precise, no greeting beyond my name. "Alpha 6, I replied. "Request activation of Surveillance Package 2. Midair environment. Target confirmed hostile behavior toward designated subject." A brief pause. "Package 2 will require escalation to Cygent. You're sure?" "Positive. She's not acting alone. I believe we have coordinated behavior between crew and passenger." "Understood. Package 2 active. Expect remote handshake in 4 minutes. Continue passive observation." The line went dead. I slid the phone back into its pouch and zipped it shut. My heart beat steady, even as the implications churned beneath the surface. This wasn't just a test of me. It was part of a larger operation I'd been brought into under the thinnest pretext. Surveillance Package 2 wasn't routine. It meant live monitoring of onboard conversations, signal interception, and coordination with ground assets who could be waiting when we landed. I'd been briefed that this operation was designed to probe for systemic failures in airline response to discriminatory incidents. What I hadn't been told was that my own flight would become the case study. Paige shifted closer, her voice barely audible under the hum of the coffee machine. "You're in deeper than they told you, aren't you?" I didn't answer directly. "I need to speak to the cabin supervisor." Her brow furrowed. "You mean the purser?" "Yes, now." She hesitated, then slipped through the curtain toward the forward jump seat. I waited, the space around me feeling smaller by the second. Lindsay's voice floated from the aisle, cheerfully offering dessert to a passenger. She had perfected the art of compartmentalization, hostile to me, gracious to others. The purser, a compact man with close-cropped hair and a demeanor that suggested he'd been smoothing over in-flight dramas for decades, appeared at the curtain. "Something I can help you with, ma'am?" "I need a moment privately," I said. "Forward galley is fine." He glanced past me toward the cabin, then stepped inside. "All right, what's going on?" Before I could answer, Lindsay appeared at the curtain, feigning surprise. "Oh, Major Carter, I didn't realize you needed assistance up here." Her tone was sweet enough to rot teeth, but the glint in her eye was anything but. "I'll handle this," the purser told her. Her gaze flicked between us, calculating. Then she backed away, though not far. I could feel her presence just beyond the curtain, listening. I lowered my voice. "Your crew member has repeatedly targeted me for differential treatment. I'm logging this formally. But there's more." I leaned in slightly. "I'm on an investigative assignment. Federal level. I'll need your cooperation." His eyes narrowed, the way people's do when they realize a problem they thought was small has just grown tentacles. "Understood," he said quietly. From the corner of my vision, Paige emerged again, carrying a tray that didn't need to be here. She placed it on the counter beside us, then leaned in under the pretext of adjusting the cups. "She's watching you like a hawk," she murmured. "And now she's wondering why you're up here." I straightened, letting my posture broadcast calm authority. "Good," I said softly. "Let her wonder." The purser cleared his throat. "What exactly do you need from me right now?" "For now, nothing visible. Just be ready to follow my lead when we get ground contact at our next destination." His jaw flexed in a silent nod. I stepped back toward the curtain, pausing to catch Paige's gaze. "Thank you," I said. And the thanks was for more than fetching the purser. She had just confirmed something the text messages implied. This wasn't random malice. Someone was orchestrating pressure from multiple angles to see what I would do. When I returned to my seat, Lindsay was halfway down the aisle, speaking to the businessman. He looked up at me with the kind of expression you'd expect from a man who believes he's part of an inside joke. Lindsay followed his gaze, then turned back to him, whispering something I couldn't hear. Ava leaned over as I sat. "What was that about?" "Just setting some things in motion," I replied. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Package 2 live. Asset cameras active. Proceed. The handshake had been made. Whatever happened from here on out would be captured from angles even I didn't have access to. It was both a reassurance and a warning. The net was closing, and I was now both the bait and the hook. In the galley, the purser passed close to Lindsay, murmuring something that made her glance sharply toward me. She didn't smile this time. That, more than anything else, told me the balance was beginning to shift, and the people watching, whoever they were, would see exactly how. The announcement came without warning, the captain's voice carrying a weight that silenced conversations mid-laugh and mid-sip. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an operational matter, we will be diverting to Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Estimated arrival, 25 minutes. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." A ripple of confusion swept through the cabin. Forks clinked against plates. Conversations turned into sharp murmurs. The businessman in 3C twisted in his seat to look at me as though the diversion had my fingerprints all over it. Then it started. A man in 1A, expensively dressed, mid-50s, the kind who wears his status like a tailored suit, shot to his feet. "This is unacceptable," he barked, his voice cutting across the murmurs. "I have a meeting in D.C. I will be calling the Department of Transportation personally." The purser approached, hands up in a calming gesture. "Sir, please take your seat. This is a safety matter." "Safety matter, my foot," the man snapped. His eyes darted to me, narrowing. "This is about her, isn't it?" He jabbed a finger in my direction. "I saw her up in the galley with you, whispering like she runs the place. If this diversion is because of some personal drama, I will have your badge." The cabin seemed to pivot around me. Dozens of eyes fixed on my seat. A few passengers whispered to one another. the way people do when they're trying to work out if they've just been conned. Ava sat up straighter beside me. "Sit down before you embarrass yourself further," she told him, her voice even but edged. He sneered. "And who are you? Her lawyer?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "And you're dangerously close to making defamatory statements in public." That earned a few quiet laughs from nearby rows, but it didn't undo the damage. I could feel the shift, the subtle recalibration of perception, the creeping suspicion in faces that had been neutral moments before. In the row ahead, the businessman leaned toward his companion. "Told you," he whispered, just loud enough for me to catch. "Probably some fake badge stunt." The seatbelt sign dinged overhead, punctuating the rising tension. I kept my posture neutral, hands resting on the backpack in my lap, my gaze fixed straight ahead. Then the notifications started pinging. Not from my phone, but from the devices around me. Twitter feeds, Facebook posts, threads on some flight enthusiast forum. In-flight Wi-Fi was running hot, and our little drama had apparently leaked onto it. A young woman 2 rows back angled her phone just enough for me to see my own face frozen mid-blink in a grainy photo. The caption, "Drama in 2A, military lady gets crew to divert flight?" The comments were a mix of outrage and support. Half were calling me a hero, the other half a fraud. The polarization was happening in real time, the cabin itself reflecting it. Paige moved down the aisle with a tray of water, her face unreadable. As she reached my row, she set a cup down in front of me without meeting my eyes, but her hand brushed mine for the briefest moment. A folded slip of paper was under the cup. I waited until she was 3 rows away before I shifted the cup aside. The note read, "Ignore them. Orders stand." I crumpled it in my fist and kept my breathing even. The man in 1A was still standing, still railing against the overreach of diverting the plane. He dropped names, senators, airline executives, regulators, like a gambler throwing chips. The purser maintained his calm, but I could see the strain around his eyes. "Sir," he said again, "if you do not take your seat, we will be required to inform the captain that you are interfering with flight operations." That finally made the man hesitate. He sat down heavily, muttering something about lawsuits and making calls the second we land. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted in enough minds that I could feel it pressing at the edges of the cabin. Even passengers who'd seen Lindsay's earlier behavior now looked uncertain, as if wondering whether I'd engineered this whole thing for some hidden agenda. Ava leaned closer. "They'll spin whatever they want," she said, "but the record will show the truth." "Records don't trend," I murmured. She smiled faintly. "But they hold up in court." The minutes to Charlotte ticked down in an uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by the occasional vibration of someone's phone as the online debate raged. Lindsay walked past once, her expression one of feigned professional concern, but her eyes held a glimmer of satisfaction. If she thought the tide was turning in her favor, she was half right. On the surface, she might have regained ground. But she didn't know about Package 2. She didn't know every word, every sideways glance. Every whispered remark was being captured, stored, and transmitted in real time. She didn't know that the next 20 minutes would decide not just her career, but the outcome of something far bigger than either of us. For now, I let her think she was winning. Sometimes the most dangerous move you can make is no move at all. The cabin lights brightened as the plane rolled to a smooth stop at the gate in Charlotte. Passengers craned their necks, murmurs fluttering like restless birds. Through the window, I saw them. 2 uniformed airport security officers, a tall man in a dark suit with an airline pin on his lapel, and another woman in a navy blazer with an ID lanyard that carried weight. The forward door opened, and the shift in atmosphere was immediate, like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a storm. The purser stepped forward, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated." The suited man entered first, scanning the cabin like he was taking a mental roster. He stopped at my row. "Major Maya Carter?" I rose, meeting his gaze. "Yes, I'm Daniel Ross. Director of Flight Operations for Atlantic Air. He gestured to the woman beside him. This is Karen Liu, Lead Investigator, FAA Compliance Division. The announcement landed in the cabin like a dropped glass. A dozen whispers sparked at once. Karen Liu spoke clearly enough for the whole forward cabin to hear. For the record, Major Carter is traveling today in her capacity as a certified FAA field inspector. This diversion was ordered under federal aviation protocol. The reaction was instant. Gasps. A few audible, "Oh my gods." Ava folded her arms, looking entirely unsurprised. The businessman who doubted me slouched into his seat. And Lindsay froze for half a second before her mask snapped back on. "Inspector?" she repeated, her tone dripping disbelief. "This is ridiculous. She's a passenger, not an inspector. This is some kind of setup." Karen's gaze didn't waver. "We have records verifying her credentials, her assignment, and the activation of a federal protocol mid-flight. Your conduct will be reviewed in full, Ms. Harper." Lindsay's laugh was short, brittle. "Oh, I get it. You think you can frame me to make a point. She turned to the passengers, raising her voice. "You all saw how she was baiting me. This is entrapment." The words baiting and entrapment hung in the air like smoke. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at her with open skepticism. Daniel Ross stepped closer, lowering his voice but making sure it carried. "Ms. Harper, we'll be conducting interviews here and later at headquarters. I suggest you cooperate." Her eyes flicked over his shoulder toward the galley. Then she did something almost imperceptible, a slight tilt of her wrist, like she was adjusting her watch. From my seat, I saw it for what it was. A signal. A moment later, the phone in her apron pocket buzzed. She glanced down, shielding the screen with her hand. My angle caught just enough of the reflection in the window to make out the text. "Stay calm. I'll make sure the report is clean. M." The sender's name wasn't visible, but the initial was enough to sharpen the edges of the puzzle in my mind. Someone in management, someone with the power to alter official records, was already moving to protect her. She slid the phone back into her pocket, and when she looked up, the defiance in her expression had shifted. It wasn't the bravado of someone who thought she could talk her way out. It was the smugness of someone who believed the game was already rigged in her favor. Karen turned to me. "Inspector Carter, we'll escort you to a secure area to debrief." I nodded, but my eyes stayed on Lindsay. "Make sure to preserve every piece of cabin surveillance from the moment of boarding," I said, my voice steady but loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Chain of custody will matter." Something in her smirk faltered. Ross gestured toward the aisle, and I stepped out, Ava rising with me. "She's my legal counsel," I told Karen before Lindsay could protest. Karen didn't even blink. "Understood." As we moved forward, the passengers' faces became a gallery of shifting allegiances, some nodding in support, others avoiding my eyes. A few had their phones up, recording discreetly. When we passed the galley, Lindsay muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to catch, "You're not as untouchable as you think." I didn't break stride. Neither are you. The security officers fell in behind us as we stepped into the jet bridge. The air outside the plane was cooler, sharper, carrying the faint scent of fuel. Behind me, the murmur of the cabin was replaced by the heavy silence of a new stage being set. Somewhere in that silence, the real game, the one about corruption and the rot in the system, was beginning to show its hand. And I intended to play it all the way. The conference room off the concourse was too small for the number of people crammed inside. 2 airport security officers stood at the door. Daniel Ross sat near the head of the table, and Lindsay perched in a chair like it was a witness stand she hadn't agreed to occupy. Karen Liu from the FAA was methodically arranging her paperwork. "This is an interim suspension of duties, effective immediately," Karen said, sliding a form across the table toward Lindsay. "You are to surrender your ID badge and company-issued devices." Lindsay's jaw tightened. She unclipped her lanyard, dropped it on the table, and set her phone down with exaggerated care. "This is absurd. You're making a spectacle of me for what, political points?" "It's not politics," Karen replied evenly. "It's compliance. You've breached multiple protocols." Ross leaned in, his voice lowering but still edged with command. "We'll escort you off the premises once this paperwork is signed. You'll have the opportunity to respond through formal channels." Lindsay signed with a sharp jab of the pen, then pushed the papers back. "Fine, let's get this circus over with." That was when I noticed Ross glance toward the second security officer, then toward the hallway outside. It was quick, almost too quick. But I'd seen those kinds of silent exchanges before. The officer gave a faint nod, as if confirming a plan. I turned slightly in my chair, catching a glimpse through the open doorway into the terminal. A third uniformed man was waiting just beyond the sightline of the room's occupants. His stance, his position. It wasn't about guarding. It was about moving someone discreetly. Ross rose. "Ms. Harper, follow Officer Jensen. He'll take you out through the East Service Corridor." The East Corridor. I'd been through it before. It bypassed the main passenger areas and, more importantly, the press, who were undoubtedly already gathering near the gate. So that was the play. Bury the optics. Make sure no cameras caught Lindsay in cuffs. No reporters had the chance to ask questions. A clean exit, a quiet suspension, and a file that could be revised by the right hands later. I stood before Ross could give another order. "She's not going out the service corridor," I said. Ross blinked. "Inspector Carter, this is an operational decision." "No," I cut in, keeping my tone steady but leaving no room for argument. "This is a matter of public accountability. She assaulted a federal inspector and engaged in discriminatory conduct on a commercial flight. That's not a backdoor situation." Lindsay smirked. "What, you want to parade me past your fan club out there? Make a martyr of yourself?" "You made yourself," I said, "the moment you decided a uniform was a provocation." Karen looked between us, calculating. "Maya, I understand the optics, but this could become a media frenzy." "It already is." Ava's voice cut through from the doorway. She'd been leaning against the wall, phone in hand, expression calm and deadly precise. "And before anyone suggests otherwise, you should see this." She stepped forward, tapping her screen. A new video began to play, this one shot in the same crisp, steady style as the recording from earlier in the flight. The date stamp in the corner read just over a month ago. The scene was unmistakably the interior of another Atlantic air flight. A younger man in an army dress uniform stood in the aisle, backpack in hand. Lindsay was there too, her posture the same, her tone sharp even without audio. The man tried to explain something, gesturing toward the overhead bin. Lindsay stepped into his space, jabbed a finger into his chest, and mouthed words that needed no sound to be understood. Then, just like with me, she slapped him. Hard. The cabin in the video gasped as one, just as our cabin had. The recording ended there, but the evidence was damning in its simplicity. Karen's expression iced over. "This was reported?" "Not officially," Ava said. "The soldier didn't want to jeopardize his leave status. But the footage was sent to my law firm anonymously 2 days ago. I didn't know it was her until today." Lindsay's color drained, but she forced a laugh. "This proves nothing. Could be anyone." "It's you," Ava said simply. "Same uniform, same badge number visible when you lean forward." Ross's gaze flicked between us, and I could see the calculation shifting in his eyes. This wasn't just one inspector's complaint anymore. It was a pattern, a liability. I stepped closer to the table. "You still want to walk her out the service corridor?" Karen didn't hesitate. "No. She leaves through the main terminal. Escorted." Ross hesitated, then gave a tight nod. "So be it." The second security officer moved to Lindsay's side. "Ma'am, this way." As they guided her toward the door, she twisted back to look at me. There was something almost feral in her stare. Anger, yes, but also the realization that whatever protection she'd counted on might not be enough. The hallway outside was brighter, flooded with the late afternoon sun streaming through the terminal's high glass windows. Beyond the security cordon, I could see the first flashes of cameras, the bobbing microphones of news crews who'd clearly caught wind of the diversion. Passengers from our flight were already there too, some filming on their phones, others watching with crossed arms. A few called out questions. One woman shouted, "Is it true you hit her?" Another asked, "Do you always pick on military passengers?" Lindsay's mouth tightened. She kept her gaze forward, jaw set, but the cameras caught every angle. Ava fell into step beside me as we followed at a measured distance. "That second video changes everything," she said. "It changes the board," I corrected. "The game's still on." We stopped just short of the press cordon, watching as Lindsay was escorted down the concourse. Somewhere behind her cool facade, she had to be wondering how many more skeletons Ava might have ready to release. And somewhere behind the scenes, the person who texted her from M was no doubt scrambling to figure out how much more they could bury, and how much was already slipping through their fingers. As Lindsay disappeared into the crowd of cameras, I felt the next layer of this unfolding mess settle into place. The corruption wasn't just in the cabin that day. It ran deeper, into offices and corridors where the real deals were made. And now, thanks to Ava's timing, we just made it that much harder for them to keep it in the dark. The morning after Charlotte, my inbox was a flood. FAA internal memos, Atlantic Air's official statements, and a growing list of passengers volunteering their testimonies. But buried in the noise was something else, a secured link from an FAA forensics unit marked Priority 1. I opened it, and the first page made my stomach tighten. The Lindsay Harper incident had triggered a review of not just her record, but a cross-check of Atlantic Air's internal complaint resolution logs for the past decade. What the data showed wasn't just negligence. It was systemic rot. The logs were littered with cases stamped closed. No action despite corroborating evidence. Several complaints mirrored mine almost exactly. Service denial, targeted harassment, and in 2 instances, physical contact against passengers in uniform. Most had been quietly buried by administrative discretion. Attached to each closed case was an internal reference code. I scrolled through until one name froze me cold. Director of Passenger Relations, Thomas Hawkins. Hawk. Back in Kandahar, he'd been my squad's communications chief. We'd run point together on a convoy extraction under mortar fire. He was the one who dragged me to cover when a round tore through my shoulder. I hadn't seen him in 8 years, and now his name was tied to the quiet dismissal of cases like mine. For a moment, my hands hovered over the keyboard, reluctant to click deeper. But muscle memory overrode hesitation. I pulled his personnel file from the Public Aviation Registry. The timeline lined up too neatly. He'd left the Air Force 2 years after I did, slid straight into a corporate role with Atlantic Air, and within months, complaint closure rates in his department spiked by 40%. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just bad optics. It was a machine designed to make problems vanish. And one of the engineers was a man I owed my life to. Karen Liu called an hour later. "Maya, you've seen the logs?" "Yes," I said. "And the name that matters." She hesitated. "We can't prove intent yet. All we know is that he signed off on multiple cases, including one from last month involving another military passenger, that were shelved without proper investigation." I stared at the ceiling. "If I push this, it's going to get personal." "Maya, it's already personal," Karen said. "But I understand. If you'd rather recuse—" "No," I cut in. "If he's part of this, I need to know why." The following afternoon, I walked into FAA headquarters for the Joint Task Force meeting. Screens lined the walls, displaying the network map of implicated names. Hawk's photo sat in the second tier, high enough to influence outcomes, low enough to avoid most of the heat. Ava was there too, her legal pad stacked with printed case summaries. "They've built a shield wall," she said quietly. "Managers like Hawk make sure frontline incidents never see daylight. That way, by the time corporate hears about it, the record says nothing happened." On the other side of the table, Karen was briefing a DHS liaison. "Our working theory is that certain personnel are incentivized, financially or otherwise, to suppress complaints from problem demographics. That includes active duty military, certain ethnic groups, and passengers flagged as high maintenance. I heard the DHS man mutter, "That's discrimination with a business plan." Midway through the meeting, my phone buzzed, a restricted number. Against my better judgment, I stepped out into the hallway to answer. "Maya," a familiar gravel voice said. "Hawk, you've got my name in your files now," he said. I figured it was only a matter of time. I didn't want it to be there, I replied. "But it is, and the cases I've seen, it's not what you think." His tone had the same unflinching steadiness I remembered from the field. "This isn't about covering for bad actors. It's about keeping a bigger operation intact. There are layers you don't see yet," I pressed. "Layers like what? Because from here, it looks like you're protecting people like Lindsay." Silence. Then, "If you push this the way you're planning, you're going to step on the wrong toes. And those toes have reach into places even the FAA doesn't want to touch." My grip on the phone tightened. "You saved my life once, Hawk. But if you're complicit in burying what happened on that plane, I'll drag this into the sunlight myself." His voice softened, almost regretful. "You were always the one who couldn't let things go. Just be sure you know which fight you're picking." The line went dead. I stood there in the quiet hallway, feeling the tectonic shift under my feet. This wasn't just about one corrupt flight attendant, or even one airline. This was about a network, part corporate shield, part old boy military alumni club, designed to make sure the right people never faced consequences. And now, one of the men who'd once pulled me out of the fire was standing on the other side of the line. By the third day after Charlotte, the story had left the aviation press and spilled across every major news network. My face, frozen mid-sentence, military cap under my arm, was now a thumbnail on millions of phones. Some headlines were clinical. FAA inspector confronts airline crew over alleged bias. Others were venomous. Entitled soldier disrupts flight, forces diversion. The division in public opinion was brutal. Veterans groups and civil rights advocates flooded social media with #JusticeForMaya. Meanwhile, a counter hashtag, #staged for fame, was gaining momentum. In the airport lounge TV, I saw strangers debating me like I was a case file instead of a person. Then came the gut punch. I was in the FAA media monitoring room with Karen when the anchor's tone shifted. "We have new exclusive footage from Flight 226. The screen cut to shaky video, apparently from a passenger's phone. It showed me standing in the aisle, jaw tight, speaking to Lindsay, but the audio was faint, replaced by captions. "Don't test me. I can make your career vanish." The clip jumped abruptly. My hand lifted, pointing toward the galley. Lindsay flinching back. The narrator's voiceover said, "Sources claim this exchange escalated the incident, leading to the alleged assault. It was a fabrication, but it was effective." In the space of 30 seconds, the clip reframed me from a calm, restrained inspector into a provoker. The online reaction was instant. "See? She started it." The airline had no choice. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. "That's not the sequence," I told Karen, my voice low but sharp. "I know," she said. "It's spliced from 2 different parts of the flight. The source?" She tapped her keyboard, scrolling. "Uploaded by a freelance contributor to Horizon News Network. The same network that's run puff pieces on Atlantic Air for years." Ava Reynolds walked in, holding 2 coffees. She froze when she saw the screen. "Oh, hell no. They're framing you." Her outrage was a brief balm, but my stomach was still dropping. "Public trust is fragile," I said. "Once the doubt sets in, they'll weaponize it," Ava finished. "Which means we need the full, uncut footage before this cements." That's when Paige appeared in the doorway. She'd been out of the public eye since Charlotte, keeping her role minimal during official briefings. "I might have what you need," she said quietly. We stepped into a side conference room, Ava shutting the blinds. Paige pulled out a thumb drive. "The cabin's internal CCTV runs on a loop. but every shift supervisor can manually archive segments. After the slap, I archived the entire stretch from boarding to diversion. I stared at her. "And you didn't turn it over already?" "I did," she said, "to my immediate supervisor. But I also made a personal copy before the system upload. Call it a hunch." Karen leaned forward. "You realize this could put you in direct conflict with Atlantic Air's legal team." Paige shrugged. "I've been in conflict with my conscience for 2 years. This feels better." We plugged the drive into a secure terminal. The footage played, clean, continuous, with timestamps intact. There it was, Lindsay's first cold glance at my uniform, the blocked overhead bin, the slap. My supposed threat in the fake clip? In reality, I'd been pointing to my boarding pass, asking for the chief purser. Lindsay's flinch was her turning away mid-sentence to grab a drinks tray. The contrast between the truth and the doctored clip was staggering. Ava's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just spin. This is targeted disinformation. Someone coordinated this release to hit before the FAA could finalize its findings." Karen straightened. "We need to authenticate this and get it into the right hands fast. But if we go public without strategic framing, we'll just look reactionary." I rubbed my temples. The sense of falling hadn't stopped. I was still plummeting, just now with a rope in reach. So we build the frame first. We don't just show the clip. We show the cut, the splice, the intent. Ava was already scribbling on her pad. Chain of custody affidavit from Paige, corroboration from at least 2 passengers, and metadata verification from FAA Tech Labs. Once we have those, we leak it to a journalist who won't sanitize it. Paige hesitated. "There's something else." She pulled a folded printout from her bag. It was an internal crew message log from the flight day, something she shouldn't have had. Highlighted in yellow was a short exchange between Lindsay and a contact labeled Ops MGR/M. L. Passenger in 2A could be trouble. M. Keep her busy. I'll handle reports if anything blows up. Ava let out a low whistle. That's the same initial from the text she got during the landing. Karen's eyes lit with the kind of satisfaction only investigators feel when a knot starts to loosen. "We can tie this to the corruption network. This isn't just a defense for you, Maya. It's an offensive strike." But for the moment, the outside world still thought I was the aggressor. My phone buzzed with another news alert. Poll: 48% believe FAA inspector provoked incident. The rope was there, yes, but we were still in free fall. I sat back, looking from Ava to Paige. "Then we move fast, before this false narrative calcifies." "Fast," Ava agreed, "and loud enough to drown out the lie." Somewhere, beyond the conference room walls, the networks were still playing that spliced footage on loop. But in here, on a battered thumb drive, the truth was waiting. And this time, I wouldn't be the one on the defensive when it came out. The press conference was standing room only. Cameras lined the back wall, their red tally lights blinking in unison like a row of watchful eyes. On stage, the Secretary of Transportation stepped to the podium. "Effective immediately," she said. "The Department of Transportation, in coordination with the FAA, is enacting the Fair Skies Protocol, a regulatory standard that will mandate equitable treatment for all passengers, regardless of uniform, ethnicity, or perceived status. Airlines will be subject to independent audits, with penalties for discriminatory conduct at any operational level." Applause broke out across the room. Karen, sitting 2 seats from me, leaned over. "This came together faster than I thought possible. Your case made it impossible for them to stall." But my attention drifted to the empty seat in the front row, reserved for a witness not yet here. Lindsay Harper. After weeks of silence, she'd resurfaced in the most unexpected way. Her attorney had contacted the FAA's Enforcement Division with a proposal: full cooperation in exchange for immunity from the harshest penalties. What she offered wasn't just contrition, it was evidence. When we met privately in a secure conference room, her posture was smaller, her voice stripped of the brittle arrogance she'd wielded on Flight 226. "I was angry," she admitted. eyes fixed on the table. And biased. That's on me, but I wasn't acting alone that day. Ops manager Michael, he's the one who told me to keep you busy. He said if I created enough friction, the report would be handled. I didn't know the scale of what I was part of until I saw the fallout. I studied her face. Why tell the truth now? Her jaw worked before she answered. Because they're going to throw me under the plane and keep flying like nothing happened. I can't undo what I did to you, but maybe I can make sure it stops here. It was a strange position to be in, looking at the person who'd humiliated me in front of a cabin full of witnesses and seeing, beneath the damage, the potential for something better. Testify, I said. Name every player, hand over every message, and you'll have my word. I'll back your entry into the FAA's rehabilitation program for displaced crew. She blinked. You do that after? This was never about revenge, Lindsay. It's about dismantling a system that hurts more people than you know. In the days that followed, her deposition blew the investigation wide open. Screenshots of internal chats, audio recordings from crew lounges, and memos signed by senior managers all fed into the corruption map. Ops manager Michael wasn't just complicit. He was a central hub in a web of suppressing claims, rewarding those who managed problem passengers and quietly rotating out whistleblowers. Now, at the press conference, the Secretary of Transportation's voice cut back through my thoughts. We wish to acknowledge the contributions of civilian witnesses and cooperating parties in this investigation. Some of those present here today have transformed from subjects of inquiry into agents of change. At that moment, Lindsay entered from the side door, escorted by her attorney. Gasps rippled through the room, reporters shuffling to capture her entrance. She walked past the press row without flinching, taking her reserved seat in the front. Karen whispered, "That's a headline by itself." When the floor opened for questions, a journalist from the Globe raised his hand. "Inspector Bennett," he said, "how do you respond to criticism that offering rehabilitation to someone like Ms. Harper sends the wrong message?" I met his gaze. Reform isn't about excusing harm. It's about ensuring it isn't repeated, sir. Harper will testify under oath, under penalty of perjury, against those who enabled systemic abuse. She will also undergo mandatory training and monitored service under the FAA's Workforce Integrity Program. That's how we break cycles, by converting insiders into deterrents. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lindsay lower her head slightly, not in shame this time, but in something closer to resolve. The conference wrapped with a formal signing of the Fair Skies Protocol. Flashbulbs strobed as the pen hit paper. It wasn't the end of the fight. Corruption rarely dies quietly, but it was a foothold. Afterward, in the hallway outside the press room, Lindsay approached me. No cameras now, no microphones. "I start the program next week," she said. "I don't expect you to wish me luck." I shook my head. "Luck won't help you. Work will." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Then I'll work." As she walked away, I felt an unexpected clarity. This chapter of the battle had begun with a slap in a crowded cabin. It ended here, in a corridor lined with the echoes of change, with the unlikely alliance of two people who'd once stood as adversaries. And somewhere, in the system that had thrived on silence, a new fracture line had begun to spread. 3 months had passed since the press conference. Enough time for the public storm to shift toward new headlines. Enough time for internal reforms to begin chewing their way into airline procedure manuals. But for me, the echoes of Flight 226 still lingered, sharp in places, softened in others. I was back at Hartsfield-Jackson, ticket in hand, bound for the same Washington route I'd taken that day. The terminal felt both familiar and entirely different, like returning to a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. At the gate, the boarding call came. I walked down the jet bridge, my military rucksack slung over one shoulder, uniform neat as inspection. The air in the cabin smelled faintly of citrus cleanser and new leather. Someone had clearly given this aircraft a recent refit. Near the door stood a young flight attendant, her smile warm and unforced. "Welcome aboard, Captain Bennett," she said, noticing the nameplate on my chest. "May I stow that for you?" She reached for my bag without hesitation. The gesture was small, but it landed in my chest like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. I let her take it, and she placed it carefully in the overhead bin, adjusting it so it sat without pressure on the seams. No hesitation. No second glance to question if I belonged here. I took my seat in business class and let the hum of passengers settling in wrap around me. Outside, ground crew moved like clockwork under the bright morning sun. As the last passengers boarded, the lead flight attendant handed me a slim envelope. "This was left at the gate for you," she said. "The agent said the sender asked it be delivered in person." I turned it over in my hands. No return address, just my name in an unsteady cursive. Breaking the seal, I unfolded a single sheet of lined paper. "Captain Bennett, you may not remember me by name, but I was the man you helped with the oxygen mask on that turbulent flight. I was too rattled to say much then, and afterward I worried my words would fall short. But I've had time now. I served as an Air Force logistics officer from 72 to 94. I've seen my share of injustice, both inside and outside the uniform. By the time you reached for that mask, I'd stopped believing the system was built to protect the right people. Watching you stand in that aisle, calm under the worst kind of pressure, reminded me what integrity looks like in real time. When I heard about the investigation and the changes it sparked, I realized something. Justice still works, but only when people refuse to back down. You did that, and you didn't do it for applause. You did it because it was right. So I wanted you to know, you've restored more than my breath that day. You've restored my faith. Keep carrying that into the skies. With respect, Colo James A. Whitmore. Return. I read it twice before lowering the page. My throat tightened, not with anger, not with grief, but with something steadier. Pride, maybe. Peace. The kind that comes when a fight is behind you, but its ripples still move outward, touching places you'll never fully see. The seatbelt sign chimed. The captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and routine. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." As we taxied out, I glanced down the aisle. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, each passenger greeted with the same easy courtesy. No one's presence here was being weighed, measured, or quietly judged. It was exactly what air travel was supposed to be, uneventful in the best way. Somewhere, reforms were still grinding forward. Somewhere else, Lindsay Harper was in week 8 of the rehabilitation program, her testimony continuing to dismantle the network that had shielded misconduct for years. Ava was drafting her second op-ed on systemic bias in the airline industry, and Paige had been promoted to lead attendant on her own routes. But here, in this moment, there was just the quiet rhythm of an aircraft climbing into clean air. I slid the letter back into its envelope and tucked it into my jacket pocket, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. When the flight leveled off, the young attendant returned, offering a bottle of water. "Anything else I can get for you, Captain?" she asked. I smiled. "No, you've already done enough." Out the window, clouds stretched in endless white below us. The sun caught the edge of the wing, turning it to silver. And for the first time since that day, I let myself simply be a passenger, carried forward by something bigger than turbulence, bigger than fear, something like trust. It wasn't a victory parade, no headlines, just the enduring truth that the smallest acts in the right moments can shift the weight of an entire system. And that was enough.